Hello and welcome to this episode of Sports Greatest Rivals with me, Brendan McGilligan, and my co-host, Jack Stott. How are you, Jack?
I'm alright, mate. How are you?
Me? Can't complain. Had a lovely wee week. What about yourself?
Yeah, fine, thanks. Busy, but getting through it. So yeah, not bad.
Excited for the day?
For today, yeah, it should be a good one. I like nice to get a bit of tennis in there. Should be alright.
Yeah.
Should be decent.
And today we're welcomed by a guest, one Flo Clifford. How are you?
Hello, I'm good. I'm alright. How are you?
Yeah, grand. Can't complain. How is your experience so far of this?
First time on it. Looks pretty cool. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, as Jack alluded to, we're talking about some tennis. And that's why I got Flo here. She's our resident expert within the company.
Thank you.
So we're going to talk about Djokovic versus tennis because we're thinking of rivalries between tennis. You had Becker back in his day. Now you had Federer and Nadal. Now you got Djokovic and tennis because we all know he's a bit controversial as well. So, Jack, what was your first kind of collection of tennis and Djokovic?
I don't know, Djokovic for me, I think he's almost been a constant in my life, to be honest. He's been there from the start. Or maybe I just caught I was probably the start of when he started being great. I think was when I started properly watching tennis. So when I was about 10. So he's just been there. He's been a constant, and he's basically constantly won since then. I think. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. He's just one of those. Just been sticking around.
And how are you at tennis?
How am I at tennis?
Yeah. Doesn't sound positive.
Yeah. I don't know. I'd below competent, the level below that, I'd say.
Right. And Flo, what was your kind of introduction into Djokovic?
I would say probably the 2013 Wimbledon final where he lost to Murray. I think growing up, Wimbledon was always the first. That was like my introduction into tennis.
Yeah.
And sort of, I guess my introduction to him was kind of negative because he was playing Murray. So all the papers were all very pro Murray because he was British. So that was kind of my introduction to him. And yeah, I think that was sort of around the time when he first became really dominant, except for that one match. So. And
then how are you at tennis?
Much more of an armchair viewer than a player.
Well, obviously I came into Djokovic, just telling Flo earlier, I kind of came about him when I was playing this Wii sports game called Grand Slam Tennis in 2008. Yeah. It's a long time ago, but he was always playing against me in like the quarterfinals or semifinals because obviously Nadal and Federer were the biggest names back then, and then obviously regarding me playing tennis, I'm quite decent, I would say. I won a few tournaments.
Very good, very good.
So,
I'm more of a squash man, me.
Oh.
No technique really. Just hit as hard as you can at the wall.
So, Jack, we're going to open this up with basically who is Novak Djokovic. Can you give me his history a wee bit, please?
Okay, so he started out. He's from Serbia, as I think you'll all know. But he got into tennis at the age of 4. His dad bought him a mini racket, soft foam ball, and his father described it as his much loved toy. He loved it, and then at 6 years old, he went off to tennis training camp. So pretty much straight out the blocks, really. And he learned under a Yugoslav tennis player. Jensic, and whilst his parents on the side ran a fast food restaurant to sort of facilitate the move, and so I think Jensic seems to what I've gathered is he's conditioned a lot of Djokovic's game that from such an early age. So he took him away from the single-armed backhand to a double-armed. He trained him to sort of. Djokovic described him as sort of shaping his mind as a human being as well as a tennis player, which is quite an interesting sort of coach relationship. Anyway, during the 90s there was the war in Yugoslavia. So
the
war in Yugoslavia.
Can you expand on that?
Well,
I think that's a no.
Yeah, there was a war in Yugoslavia. Yeah. And NATO anyway was sort of seemed to be sort of a bombardment of bombings and sort of things happening in and around where he was growing up. So it seems there's a lot of fear. He's sort of exhausted, through a lot of this sort of early stage of his tennis career, but he was said to have this drove him more to pursue tennis. And at points he was like training in a abandoned swimming pool as a tennis court rather than sort of the facilities that would have been given to someone like a Nadal or a Federer. So he's sort of come through this diversity.
It sounds similar to another Serbian, do you know Nemanja Matic?
Yes.
Obviously he went through all that around the same time, and he just discussed how kind of drove him forward to kind of have a career in the future. You know what I mean? Can you kind of move on to kind of like his playing career?
Yeah, so he sort of dominated the sort of under 14 circuit through a long time, and I actually had some funny matchups in the ETA Junior Tour. So he beat Andy Murray in the semi-finals.
Who hasn't beat Andy Murray?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. And in that year he led the Serbian team to the European Super Cup, so won the European Championship singles and doubles in 1 year, and finished a juniors record with 40 and 11. So combined world ranking of 24th. So he made his Grand Slam debut in Australia in 2005 when he defeated Stan Wawrinka in Wawrinka, excuse me, in the second round. Yeah, exactly.
The pronunciation of things.
In the second round of qualifying, and then eventually got defeated in the first round by the eventual champion Marat Safin. Flo.
Good checking on it.
Yeah. And then he sort of won his first Grand Slam in. He got to his first final in 2007 and won his first one, I believe, 2008.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was the Aussie Open.
Yes.
So since then, he's kind of won 24. He's the highest achieving male of the sport with 24 Grand Slams. He's also, I think he's won 71 tournaments in total as of so far. Flo, what do you think about kind of his kind of potency and how good he's been to this point?
I think his longevity is the main thing that makes him stand out. The fact that he came onto the tour sort of five years into when Federer was winning, a couple of years after Nadal came onto the scene, and has since outlasted Federer, is likely to outlast Nadal as well, given his injury record. The fact that Djokovic has been able to compete so consistently over what's that now, like by the end of his career, probably about 20 years, is really, really impressive. And I think it's also his mental strength that makes him stand out.
I noticed you didn't say Murray when you compared them.
Yeah, I suppose if we're talking numbers,
he's a long way off.
I think the fact that like Murray could compete with them at the highest level, but often didn't get that far.
The longevity of Murray is
and again,
not comparable. It's like a
problems.
3 year sort of span, 3-5 year span of Murray being at that level, and then sort of not. Whereas they've held it for 15 years. I suppose.
Well, it was interesting what you were saying about his mental state. There was a lot interview done with Djokovic about why he feels he's so mentally strong. It was because basically his dad put all their financial hopes on him, and he said when he gets to those kind of clinch moments, he remembers back to that, and he just says, "If I can do it then, I can do it now."
And I think that history of growing up amid NATO bombardments, all of that's a tougher.
You didn't grow up in Derry.
Tougher upbringing than some other players.
Yeah.
I think he credits that for kind of his extreme mental toughness.
Well, obviously we kind of all have a kind of admiration for him, but like he has had a number of rivalries to this point. The rivalry he played the most was, do you know, Jack? Who he played the most?
Federer, I believe. He played him 50 times throughout their career.
He played Nadal more.
Did he?
He played Nadal 59 times.
Okay, apologies.
No, don't apologise, lad. That's why we're here. Now, what was the record between them, if you do know?
Djokovic and Federer, Djokovic had 27, Federer 23. It's the biggest amount of wins over Federer of any player ever. So yeah, it seemed to be. It's widely considered one of the greatest rivalries ever in tennis history, I think.
But would you argue that maybe Nadal's one's better, considering their record was 30 to 29?
Possibly, I think they're more competitive. I think Djokovic probably, arguably. I think it might just be a time lapse thing in the reason. I think if you had prime Federer and prime Djokovic for the same amount of time as Nadal, it may be different, but I think
it also doesn't help, and you might want to weigh in this on Flo of. Nadal's just so dominant on clay, like so dominant that the record on grass is level, but on hard courts it swings in Djokovic's favour.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that kind of all the big three, if we're going to call them that, they each have one surface where they are better than the rest in terms of titles won, which is interesting. But I think they're kind of at their closest on hard courts, which is Djokovic's favourite surface.
Yeah. But obviously 2 of the Grand Slams are hard court as well, which gives him a wee bit of an advantage with chasing that Grand
Yeah,
Slam
definitely.
kind of love that he wants to kind of get. What was it? He had we'll get on to it after. Don't worry. But was it No Grand Slam where he held every title in 2016, every Grand Slam.
Calendar Grand Slam.
No, he didn't get that. That's the kind of point. He renamed it, which is one reason why people don't like him.
Well, he had like a gold jacket.
Yeah.
That had his name on it with the number of Grand Slams. Interestingly, Federer also did that.
Didn't receive the hit, did he?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly which one it was, but he changed into
Wimbledon, wasn't it?
I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
it was a record extending or record breaking Wimbledon that he won, and he had this special edition Roger Federer jacket he put on for the victory ceremony, which interestingly didn't receive the same criticism that Djokovic's did.
We'll get into that later, but can you also kind of elaborate on his rivalry with Murray? Like, was there really one, or have the British media tried to portray it as one?
I think in terms of like the quality of the tennis, it was always incredibly high quality, and they were the two because they broke onto the scene at the same time pretty much. Murray is only a week older than Djokovic. They turned pro at a similar time. They played each other in juniors. They kind of both went up into the professional circuit at the same time. And they were the only ones that could really go toe-to-toe with Federer and Nadal at the time when they were most dominant. So I think that's kind of why it became this big thing.
Yeah.
And I think they're quite similar characters in some ways in terms of like, aggressive playing style, quite aggressive in terms of how they behave when things aren't going right for them, as opposed to Nadal and Federer, who tend to be sort of calmer characters. They've ended up with some quite attritional matches, but they've just been considered to be some of the best in modern tennis. So in terms of their head-to-head, Djokovic leads it by 25 to 11.
Yeah.
So
it's quite a big gap for a rivalry.
Compared to against Federer and Nadal, it's quite a lot bigger. And in terms of Grand Slam finals, it's 5-2, and Grand Slams in total 8-2. Also, obviously Djokovic.
Doesn't sound like much of a rivalry.
So he's got 24 Grand Slam victories.
Murray's got
and
3 or
Murray
4?
has 3.
3. So he's won 1 US and 2 Wimbledon.
Yes.
Yeah. But to be fair to Murray, and I don't say this about most Brits, he beat him twice on grass. Djokovic has never beat him on grass. That's quite a good stat to hold. Now, there's a few other people. Jack, lovely pronunciation of Stan
Wawrinka.
Thank you. Them two had quite a history as well. So they did. Now, again, Son and Murray, their record's not great, but Wawrinka has defeated him in 2 Grand Slam finals. So he has. 2015 French Open and 2016 US Open. That stopped him getting the calendar Grand Slam.
Yeah, exactly.
Which, obviously, if it was me, it would destroy me a bit. It would destroy me a bit. But there's also Daniil Medvedev, thank you. No, that one's interesting in terms of, again, a Grand Slam final. Djokovic lost.
Yeah, I think that was really interesting. Again, so that was the 2021 US Open final, which Medvedev won in straight sets. And I think I don't know the exact number of Grand Slam finals that Djokovic has lost in straight sets. I think it's probably very small.
I think it could be the only one.
It might be the only one.
Yeah.
From memory.
His first one actually against Federer.
Okay.
Yes.
But
so that's at the very start of his career, and this is when
yeah.
he was really dominant.
What else did that do? What did Medvedev do with that win?
I mean, I think he was just because he'd lost to him in the Australian Open that year, and he got asked afterwards like, "What do you need to do, or what are you going to do now?" And he was like, "To beat him, I just need to be better."
Yeah.
And that was exactly what he did. I thought what was interesting about that one is Medvedev is kind of, I think less so nowadays, but especially in 2021, he was like the villain of that match.
Yeah.
For once, the crowd were really behind Djokovic to the point where it moved into tears. There was a bit in Medvedev was serving for the championship in the final set, and Djokovic sat down in tears.
Yeah.
And the crowd were chanting his name, which it doesn't happen elsewhere.
We'll get to that again in terms of controversies around Djokovic, but that actually again that final stopped him winning the calendar Grand Slam.
Yeah.
So he's twice lost out on it so narrowly. It kind of makes you feel a wee bit sorry for him. Do you know what I mean? Because only 2 tennis players have ever done it, and Federer and Nadal came nowhere near it really.
Yeah.
Now the only other person I want to kind of mention is Carlos Alcaraz.
The future.
Thank you, Jack.
I love him.
Why do you love him?
Oh, he's just so fun to watch.
He is
And
brilliant.
he's just a classy tennis player, and he's just like, that's the, I don't know, I think the problem people have often had with Djokovic, despite all the controversies, is they just don't like what his style of play, even though he's so, like, it's so effective.
But I always found it similar enough to Nadal, and people love Nadal.
I think Djokovic is sort of so good as to be. I think the criticism sometimes is he's a bit robotic. It's like he's sort of too perfect for a human to be able to do it. I think with Nadal and also Alcaraz, there's more of like a human dynamic
I think
to how they play.
there's something about their like style. I think the way they move across the court, it just seems like a bit more like, I don't know, like in a bit more like in a poetic sort of like dancey sort
They're
of
more
style.
like explosive
Yeah,
as well,
exactly.
I think.
Whereas with Djokovic, it is very much like he's so dominant. He's so everywhere where he needs to be straight away. So you miss sort of that excitement of watching them play, which is credits to Djokovic, obviously.
So, question, you're saying about Alcaraz being the future
Yes.
and him potentially winning so much.
Yeah.
Will you come to hate him?
Well, no one came to hate Federer, did they? When
People
he was
came to hate Djokovic.
I know, but I don't know. It's as I said, it's the style of play. I think Federer he had all the shots, like all the trick shots and stuff, which Djokovic probably never needs to use because he's so on top. But I just think there was always something about watching Federer that was like, it was just like unbelievable, like
It's like
beautiful
watching a
talent.
ballet dancer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's something about it compared to how Djokovic plays, which makes them more intriguing to watch. Maybe, but.
I think also these younger players, because I would add Yannick Sinner to that list of potential rivals at the minute. This is my favourite stat, is the only person to beat Djokovic twice in a day at the Davis Cup. He beat him in the singles and the doubles. The singles from 3 match points down, which again, I don't think has ever happened before.
Okay.
Again, Djokovic has never lost a match from 3 match points down. 3 match points up, sorry.
Fair enough.
But I think the younger players probably have the advantage of being more media trained than Djokovic would have been at the start.
You're saying because he's old?
Well,
Yes, yes.
And I think also having that, they come across as more, not all of them, Holger Rune is an example of one that doesn't, but they come across as fairly humble, which I think is not really something that anyone would describe Djokovic as.
It was something I saw when Nadal was, they were comparing him and Nadal. They said Nadal was very complimentary of Djokovic, whereas Djokovic was like, I just want to win.
Yeah.
He was very much focusing on himself rather than playing the game, as many have said is a problem with him. Now, Flo, do you want to kind of enlighten us a bit more on, we've kind of touched on it a couple of times, the controversies
Sure thing.
regarding big old Novak?
Let's get my notes up because there's a long list.
A long list.
Interesting.
Don't worry, Jack's going to fill us in those good points, it's fine.
I mean, I think the main reason I think he's sort of come more into the public eye in the last few years is obviously the big vaccination debate, being deported from Australia. You know, you couldn't make it up, the drama over that.
Well, he got caught for making up stuff.
Yeah, well, also falsifying COVID tests. And I think also his sort of fairly, I guess you could say, superstitious beliefs in terms of health. He's always been very vocal about being careful about what he puts in his body.
But is that not just kind of that whole body's a temple thing?
Yeah, but I think he's taken it to an extreme, which I think a lot of people were uncomfortable with, especially when it came to COVID and being so reluctant to get the vaccine. And I think it sort of tapped into like wider conspiracy theories and the fact that he became like a magnet for conspiracy theorists, like camping outside the hotel in Australia when he was about to get deported. Excuse me. You know, that kind of, it puts him in like one side of a media narrative and it's the bad side in quote marks. And there's also been controversies throughout his time playing, which, you know, nothing's ever been proved, but well-timed medical timeouts when the momentum is swinging the other way.
I was going to say there's been moments where people have complained about him retiring or being injured.
Yeah, I think it's more taking those medical timeouts or very well-timed toilet breaks when kind of the pressure's on. So there's been some criticism of that as being sort of foul play.
No, you can't. Look, we all know our body's best. Clearly he knows his better. Do you know what I mean? So
Well,
when he's
that's
calling for a
the thing.
medical break,
I
he
think-
needs it.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think it's hard to
Judge.
kind of come down on one
Yeah.
side or another. And in terms of the whole like body of the temple thing, there was also controversy. The 2022 Paris Masters. There was a weird clip that circulated of his team like mixing him up some kind of energy drink and actively hiding it from the cameras when they realised they were being filmed. And it kind of went all over tennis Twitter, and people were a bit like, "That's weird. Why are they?
Yeah.
What's the need for that?" And some people said, "Well, it's a non-sponsored thing. They've got to be careful about what they can show." But it did seem it was one of those things where people jumped on it.
Well, the argument would be if it's non-sponsored, then like he's big enough to get sponsored very quickly.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like he could have got it sorted.
I think it was just one of those things in a list of sort of semi-strange behaviour on court that people jumped on.
Yeah.
There's also been sort of political things as well.
Kosovo's a big one.
The Kosovo message at the French Open last year, writing a message on the camera after.
Is that the quarterfinal or?
No, round of 16.
Yeah.
After he won that, it's tradition to write a message on the camera, and he chose to write one that was about Kosovo being part of Serbia, which is obviously
we're not going to get into
a very politically fraught message, to say the least. And he said, "I don't think a drama-free Grand Slam can happen for me." So he's aware. He's aware of his image.
Do you think he plays up to it to an extent?
I was about to say, I think to an extent, it's like with Medvedev, who really like winds the crowd up when he wants to. He is sort of a pantomime villain, and I think Djokovic does. He said before, like the crowd's booing him, like gets him fired up.
But he wasn't always like that.
No.
He was beloved in the late 2000s, early 2010s by a lot of media organisations because he was a fresh air. He was doing impressions of other people. How does he go from that to kind of the most vilified person in tennis at the minute?
I think to some extent the COVID controversy has really accelerated that. I would say that I think that was a big thing for a lot of people. The fact that he was so sort of coy about saying if he'd been vaccinated or not, and then obviously people found out that he wasn't, and he was willing to be deported and miss most of the 2020 season because of it. I think that was probably quite a major thing.
Yeah.
And I think also for some people, the fact that he did disrupt the Federer and Nadal rivalry, because I would say out of all, what would you think of all tennis players, they've got the biggest, most sort of vocal
fan base.
Yeah,
definitely. I think. Yeah, that disruption. Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. I never really thought
he
that.
He came on the scene right when between them they'd won 11 consecutive Grand Slams.
Yeah. And everyone was
Before
lapping it up as well.
Yeah.
They were loving it. It was just like one of the greatest sort of things to watch.
People were starting to just say that's the rivalry they wanted to watch.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like it was McEnroe and was it Bjorg?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was McEnroe and Bjorg. Them two were going head to head, and then that just was cut short because Bjorg retired. So it was the thing that tennis looked for, a rivalry, and then someone came in and ruined everyone's fun. Do you know what I mean? Like, as I said, like he was described as the antithesis to the Fidel kind of view of he's just completely different from them.
Yeah.
And
Very
just,
different styles.
as you say, robotic earlier. But like, there was obviously, if you want to kind of build on it, of that incident where he hit the line judge with the ball.
Yeah, I don't think that would have helped his reputation much either. So he was disqualified for hitting a line judge with a ball at the US Open in 2020.
Yeah.
Basically just lost his temper. Didn't do it deliberately, but hit the ball out of anger somewhere.
Yep.
Hit a line judge who immediately sort of fell to the floor, couldn't breathe. And the rules are very clear. If you hit a ball with no regard for the consequences, that results in you being disqualified.
Jack's life motto.
Yeah.
Jack's life motto.
That's it.
Yeah.
Don't hit anyone with no balls.
Cheers for that. He also was forced to give back his $250,000 prize money that he'd earned. So.
And his ranking points as well, I believe he lost.
Oh no.
So that was important for the end of season finals.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think he can't be, he's visibly bad-tempered on court a lot of the time when things aren't going his way. That was a big example of that. He did apologise later on. He apologised to the line judge and on Twitter.
So he's all right now then.
So I think.
I think that. Sorry, Flo.
I think it clearly wasn't done deliberately, but the rules are the rules.
But it was Djokovic, so he didn't mean it.
Yeah, I think on building on that, I think like one of the main reasons people may actually have such a sort of dislike towards Djokovic is this bad temper. He's not like your traditional like, tennis gentleman sort of thing that maybe Federer, he maybe it's changed now in the modern game, but I think when he came up through the Federer Nadal, and it's very much like a gentleman sport played by gentlemen, and like everyone treats the game with respect, whereas he's come in and sort of, he's not got this attitude of like sucking up to the line officials and the bodies of tennis. He's sort of doing his own thing, and maybe that's sort of tainted like the traditional tennis fans' sort of opinion of him in some sense.
I was going to say, when we were talking about he doesn't play the game, that whole thing of he has his own principles and he is who he is, and he won't play that kind of game to the media or play that game to the officials. That does ruffle a few feathers within communities. I was going to compare him to John McEnroe. Kind of that anger that's there. And not many people like McEnroe after the initial kind of sharp change he brought.
No.
After the first 2 years, people were like, no, we're tired of this.
And I think people also like McEnroe more now that he's, as a commentator, when he's sort of admitted his faults and kind of apologised for being a bit of a pothead in his youth.
Alright, so we might come to love Djokovic in the end.
I think the other thing with Djokovic is in most interviews, he comes across quite well. Less so, obviously, when he's lost.
Yeah.
But I think there is a sort, and I think he personally feels a bit victimised from what we can tell, because there is a sense of what is he doing wrong, because he does come across well in interviews. He is chatty on court.
He's having a bit of crack these days. By jumping around with the crowd.
Yeah.
And Jack, you want to kind of fill us in on what kind of good he's done off the court as well? Like he's done a lot of good.
Yeah, I'm sure he's been involved in several sort of charity events, for sort of he's got his own foundation and things. So he's sort of helping a lot of children from disadvantaged backgrounds throughout Serbia get developed into sort of safe environments and things like that. So he's constantly tarnished with this sort of tennis bad boy, but only I think that would be the case for a lot of people seen throughout sports as well. I think you'd say the same about maybe Lewis Hamilton at a point, similar sort of dominance, but had done so much good outside of the sport that you sometimes forget this the what's the word I'm looking for? The sort of
impact
reach and the impact that they can have outside of their sport because of how they act whilst they're playing it, but at the end of the day, they're like elite competitors, aren't they? So
there's other people who wouldn't do that stuff. Like as you said, he's got his own foundation where he helps people in Serbia and other underprivileged areas to kind of hopefully get them out of that kind of situation, because he knows himself. He grew up in a very, very disadvantaged kind of area in terms of a war zone. He also, the 2014 floods in in Serbia, Kosovo, that he helped basically by giving all his winnings from the 2014 Rome Masters to it. Like, as Flo said, like what does he have to do to not be kind of vilified? Like, those are some great things he's done, but they're all painted over with his actions on a court. Yeah. And he didn't want to get the COVID jab. People around the world didn't really get it, but yet he's the one who's the poster boy of it. He also, he has anger issues when he loses. I guess we've all been there. Do you know what I mean? We've all probably said something that we haven't kind of felt proud of in the end. Probably done something we aren't proud in the end through anger.
I think also it seems to me like he sort of mellowed a little bit in recent years. Does it
help being the highest achieving male tennis
probably, yeah, and also that prize money probably helps. But I think also,
helps the kids. What do you know?
You can compare him to, Nick Kyrgios is the one that springs to mind in terms of a real dirtbag, essentially, bad boy of tennis.
Those are all Flo's comments, not.
And I think it's interesting that they've sort of had beef in the past, and then the Wimbledon final they played was actually, at the end, they clearly have a lot of respect for each other, and I wonder if there's a sort of affinity there because they've got perhaps a similar...
The hatred of the world on them.
I don't know, kind of, not necessarily all that similar, but some kind of same temperament, and sort of being disruptors in a way. So,
just kind of finish up. Look, what do we think the legacy of Djokovic will be? Because he's came out recently saying he will retire soon. So he has. So what do we think the legacy will be? Will it be, he's the best tennis player that ever played? Or boo that guy, he's like Scar from Lion King.
I think his legacy will. I think in 10 years' time, no one's going to remember the controversies, and I think people are going to regret the amount of stick they've given him when he's not playing anymore. To be honest, I think people are going to miss watching him play, and I think when he goes, I think it's going to be.
It's a very weird moment. For
yeah,
the sport,
it is. I think the sport's whole the whole structure has sort of been built around him and then Federer and Nadal for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And so, and no one's ever come to challenge them. And then you've sort of got this new generation who are, I think, Alcaraz and Sinner.
I'll get out of the check-in.
But they both, I think, maybe show signs, but I don't think either of them are ever really going to show the same sort of dominance that Djokovic has.
I could see definitely Alcaraz.
But do you think the issue is Alcaraz is 2021?
Yeah.
Djokovic is 33. That
36.
will never. Is he 36?
Yeah.
Jesus. Right. Okay. He's looking well. But the whole thing is he never tested himself against the greatest tennis player, really, because he's 36. He probably was better a couple of years ago.
I don't think he is.
Really?
This is what I've seen some
Must be all that
commentators.
secret stuff in France he's
Well,
taken.
potentially, yeah. I think that's what kind of all these commentators have been saying. Like, it's amazing how he's kind of at his peak now. When most players are kind of in their sort of declining years.
Don't say anything controversial, but he didn't get a COVID jab. Maybe there's something there.
That's Brendan's. We do not.
Don't worry. I've got all 6 jabs. It's fine. But his legacy is a strange one. So, just kind of summarising, Jack, do you like the guy? Do you hate the guy? Do you think tennis is right? Or do you think Djokovic is right?
You know what? Before I started doing some of this research, I've always been just like anti-Djokovic. Just because, just for no reason. But having seen read a bit more into his life and sort of his history, I still don't want him to win anything, but that's just because it's boring, I think.
Right.
But more in the sense of I've got a new sort of found respect for him, maybe. Well, I always did, but more so now than I did before. But in terms of him versus tennis, I'll always think I'll back the sportsman in these sorts of incidents rather than the sport. I think that, ultimately he's the one that's providing the entertainment. It's nothing to do with the board of tennis or what the public think at the end of the day. But ultimately, when he plays Alcaraz in the Australian Open or whoever he plays, I'll probably be backing the other guy. Just because I don't know why, it's just a weird stigma or something.
And Flo, what do you think? Do you love the guy, or do you just think, Jesus, wish he would disappear?
I think he's brilliant for the sport. I do agree that, when I was watching him play Federer, I wanted Federer to win purely because I preferred his style of tennis. And I did prefer him as a personality. And I think in terms of the Australian Open, I will probably be rooting for one of the young generation because there's been so much hype about it. I want to see them finally come through. I think
that young generation's been around for about 10 years.
No, not this one.
I know.
They've missed one out. I think this might be Yannick Sinner's perfect opportunity for his first Grand Slam. But I do think, I don't think anyone's going to come close to his legacy, Djokovic's legacy. So I think he has just been fantastic for the sport. I think he's made everyone else raise their level to be able to compete with him. So that can only be a good thing, in my opinion.
Whereas I love like a pantomime villain. And
That does not surprise me in the slightest.
I love Djokovic with a passion. As I say, I always beat him at that game when I was growing up, which was always nice. That someone could beat him. But the whole thing was, like, I did love Nadal. I love Nadal more than I love Federer.
Interesting.
I was always kind of the view of, look how hard you have to put the work in to be able to match, and the physicality of them. Like that effort, I knew Nadal would never kind of last with the way he played compared to Federer.
Yeah.
I didn't think Djokovic would, but Djokovic has because of his style. But as I said, like tennis has a lot of flaws in terms of the way that they kind of split of the ATP.
Yeah.
For the representation of players that Djokovic did was a kind of good thing in terms of a lot of players' views. Like Andy Roddick backed it, quite a lot of players backed it. I think there's over 500 members now within it.
Yeah, it's the PTPA that kind of getting players more involved in, like a union essentially.
Exactly, and I think they needed that because tennis were kind of holding everything for tennis.
Yeah.
tennis make a lot of strange decisions, as do a lot of sports. It's just the way kind of boys in the board are. Do you know what I mean? So I kind of look at Djokovic upsetting the kind of apple cart and going like, look, fair play to you. You keep going. Do you know what I mean? No one complains about Serena Williams winning everything.
Well, people did.
Yeah, they did.
Not anymore.
I can tell you the fact that my granddad regularly complains about
That's a whole other podcast.
but I won't go into too much detail about that one.
But yeah, in my opinion, Djokovic is just the greatest player I've seen. So look, thank you for listening. Flo, thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Jack, we'll be back next week to discuss a bit more in terms of rivals. But look, give us a wee kind of shout of what you want to hear, who you want to hear about next. And we've enjoyed everything that you've had to endure by listening to us. So thank you very much, and see you next week. Goodbye.